Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to talk about Commander tough rules and cool interactions, episode 44. Today's episode is going to be a deep dive into an ability that was introduced to the game back in the Commander 2015 products, and despite being almost 8 years old now, it has only been printed on 18 different cards, and a large majority of those 18 were actually just printed in the recent Commander Legends Baldur's Gate set. The ability is Myriad, which is actually quite a powerful effect in multiplayer Magic, and I have covered a Myriad card on this channel in the past with episode 26 that discussed the unique cost reduction on Null Warband, but even there I mentioned at how that uncommon is actually quite powerful. As a card for just possibly 3 mana, you get a creature that can deal around 15 damage each turn, but I've still never seen it played once. I run it in my Torbran deck, where it is regularly reduced to costing just 3 mana, and it regularly deals around 21 damage each turn, which is crazy for an uncommon. Also, before we dive deep into Myriad, I want to thank Mimic Lure Aegis, who originally requested that I do this video on Myriad, as well as suggested some talking points. And I also want to thank Pierce XLR8, who added some additional talking points to cover with Myriad. I'll do my best to answer and cover some of the specific things that they mentioned, as well as cover some things that I feel just a lot of players may get wrong, or just may not even know about Myriad. Like with all abilities in Magic, they are covered in the 700 section of the Comprehensive Rules. Myriad specifically is in section 702.116, and like many abilities, their specific section there is very short and sweet. They don't get complex until you start combining them with other game effects. So let's start by reading what the ability actually does. Myriad is a triggered ability that says, whenever this creature attacks, for each opponent other than defending player, you may create a token that's a copy of this creature that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. If one or more tokens are created this way, exile the tokens at end of combat. I'm going to start with one thing I find that a whole lot of players don't know about how Myriad works, and that is its interactions with planeswalkers. Oftentimes, cards care about you attacking a player or opponent. Like with Karazakar, you have to attack a player to get the goad trigger, as well as get the card draw trigger. But with Myriad, the creature only needs to attack. If my creature with Myriad attacks your planeswalker, then I will still get 2 new creature tokens that I can send at either of my opponents themselves, or I can even send the tokens that are created at planeswalkers that the opponent controls. They don't have to be sent always towards players directly. Certain abilities in Magic are redundant, like Flying, Trample, and First Strike. If you get them multiple times, it doesn't really change anything. Your double flying creature doesn't fly higher than any other flying creature, with just one instance of flying. Myriad, on the other hand, is not a redundant ability, so multiple instances of it will stack and all will trigger individually. So, hypothetical and amazing scenario, you have a Duke Ulder Ravenguard deck. As well as the Duke being out, you have a Legion Loyalty out, and a Battle Angels of Tyr with a Blade of Selves equipped. So at the beginning of combat, you use your Duke to give your Battle Angels a 4th instance of Myriad, and then you attack. Assuming that you have 3 opponents, you will have a total of 8 token copies of the Battle Angels coming in and attacking 2 very unlucky opponents, which means that you will have 9 possible combat damage triggers from your 9 total Battle Angels. In this specific case, pay close attention to the math, as each of these triggers will check their conditions upon resolution and not when they're placed onto the stack. It doesn't come up often, but it's worth pointing out that Myriad is a May trigger, which means if your opponent has out something like a Suture Priest or Bloodseeker that penalize you for when you have creatures coming out, and let's say you're at really low life, low enough that creatures entering your battlefield could actually kill you, then you can actually choose to not have the creature tokens be created. I won't go too much into detail on the next point, as I've already done an episode doing a deep dive into this, so for more info, check out Tough Rules and Cool Interactions episode 11, but the tokens created by Myriad enter the battlefield already tapped and attacking, which means that they get around combat restrictions such as Propaganda and Blazing Archon. This also means that the tokens will not trigger things like Druid's Repository, as they were never declared as an attacker. While they don't trigger attack triggers, they do still trigger any ETBs, enter the battlefield. So things like Kindred Discovery, they will cause you to draw from them entering the battlefield, but not for them attacking, because they were never declared as an attacker. If your attacker that has Myriad also has something like Melee, and they're the only creature that you attacked with, the attacking tokens that are created that it makes with Myriad would not further pump the initial creature with Melee. So it would only get +1/+1 for the opponent that it itself is attacking, not the tokens. The tokens you make would not be able to use anything like boast abilities, as again, they were never declared as an attacker. If you were to give Myriad to your combat celebrant, then the tokens that it makes would not be able to exert, as they were never declared as an attacker. These are just a few examples of things that wouldn't happen. Some other things that they do not trigger is dies triggers. At the end of combat, the tokens are exiled. So if you have out a black market, none of the tokens going away via exile at the end of combat will add any counters. However, the thing that exiles the tokens is a delayed trigger ability, and there is no sort of replacement effect on them like what we see with cards like Whip of Erebos, which says exile at the beginning of the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. And this means that if you have any sacrifice outlets like a Yawgmoth Thran Physician, then you can sacrifice your Myriad creature tokens to these sac outlets, and then they will start to trigger any dice triggers. I want to expand upon the ETB aspect of these creatures because they all enter the battlefield at the same time. So this means that they each see each other enter the battlefield. This means that if you were to give Myriad to your Doomwake Giant and then attack, that means that you would have one already out on the battlefield and two new Doomwake Giants entering the battlefield. So the original sees two new enchantments entering the battlefield. One of the new tokens sees itself and another enchantment entering, and then the other new token sees itself and another enchantment ETBing. So that would be 6 total triggers of your opponent's creatures getting -1/-1. Now let's get into what happens when you're making even more of these creature tokens. The classic card is Doubling Season. I won't get too into the details, as I've already covered this in actually 3 episodes, episodes 13, 16, and also 19. So go check out those episodes for a more deep detail analysis of this effect. But for this episode, if you have out a Doubling Season and then attack with a Myriad creature, you will indeed create 2 creature tokens for each other opponent. So in a 4-player game, you will create a total of 4 creature tokens with a single instance of Myriad. One cool thing about this is that you can decide where each one is going if the player does have a Planeswalker. You could send 1 token to the opponent themselves and the second token to a Planeswalker that they have. They do not all have to be sent towards the same thing. Now, you're probably asking, what happens to those extra tokens when you get to your end of combat? Do all 4 of them have to be exiled, or just the original ones, and then the bonus ones that you got from Doubling Season can stick around? Sadly, with how replacement effects work, you will have to exile all 4 of the tokens. Again, check out those earlier episodes for the details behind this. But now on to making copies of these tokens. Maybe you have a Myriad Conclave Exile deck, or something like a Riz the Redeemed. Riz the Redeemed. If you were to use Riz's 6 mana ability to make token copies of the Myriad created tokens, then the copies that Riz makes will indeed get to stick around, because the delayed trigger is not something that is copied. The way Myriad's populate trigger works is on attack, as is Myriad, which means that you can put Myriads on the stack first, Myriad on the stack second. That way the Myriad resolves first, and because populate doesn't require any targets when placed onto the stack, you can pick the token that gets copied upon resolution. And just like with Riz, the delayed trigger will not be copied for the new token copies. Last thing that I want to mention, I've already touched on it a bit in this episode when talking about certain things not being copied, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, as this deals with the layers system, and those sorts of things always deserve an episode dedicated to themselves, as the layer system is complex. But for the sake of this episode, your Myriad creatures that attack, the tokens that are made through Myriad, will not have anything like the effects from auras, equipment, or counters, or any other continuous effects that are applied to them do not carry over to the new tokens that are created. So for example, if you have Armadillo Cloak on the Myriad creature, the tokens created will not also have Trample. The increased power toughness they won't get either, nor will they get the life gain triggered ability. If you cast a sorcery like Triumph of the Hordes, and then you attack with a Myriad creature, the new tokens will not have Trample. They will not have Infect. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. If there are any situations or scenarios that you think I've missed that deal with Myriad, then please do post those things down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them down there. If anyone has any other requests on any specific abilities that they would like me to do a deep dive into, then please do request them down in the comments below as well. As always, I hope that all of you found this video to be entertaining, at least, and I hope that a few of you may have even learned something about these crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta.